2014 Chevy Cruze, and before you click away, I know the Chevy Cruze doesn't necessarily have the best reputation for reliability. And videos like this seem to get thumbs down pretty early on. But there's something that you do want to know about this car. You might be wondering why this car is on the channel. Well, one, these cars seem to defy the odds of the car market inflation right now. These can be found for almost next to nothing, and they ride far better than you would actually expect them to ride. They're way quieter than a lot of the competition, even some of the Toyotas and especially the Hondas. But the obvious question would be, why would anybody consider a car with known reliability concerns? Well, for starters, there's two available engines in this car. One is better than the other, and if you're buying them 12 years, there's just one that's gonna outshine the other no matter what as far as longevity. It's this one right here. And so the real question is, why does this 1.8 liter give you the better odds long term? If you're shopping for a very budget commuter and you wanna stack the deck in your favor, this is a video you're gonna wanna watch. As I'm in front of this Chevy Cruze, you can tell that this has not lived a pampered life. For its age and the heavy use that this car has been through, it's in better condition than I expected it to be. So you can tell that it's been repainted at some point. The headlights are faded and you have damage right here. In good condition, the Chevy Cruze is not a bad looking car at all. And I think that's something people miss with budget cars like this, and that is condition matters more than anything. But from a better angle, the car is not bad at all. This one is gonna need some TLC, but it would be worth it depending on what price you can get it for.
The exterior quality on the first generation Chevy Cruze is actually pretty manageable. You're not dealing with major widespread paint failures like we've seen on other GM vehicles, like the blue Buick Encore for example, or even certain white Hondas, Toyotas, or other white GM vehicles. There's no big avoid this color at all costs type of situation with this Chevy Cruze. What you do get is a bunch of smaller knickknacks that add up over time. Things like crusty window trim or the roof trim fading and getting grainy like you see here, and that classic GM issue where the plastic chrome starts to peel. Even the Chevy badge can wear out or fall off just like you see on this car. None of it is serious, and the good news is that all of it is manageable. A diligent owner can stay ahead of it pretty easily, but realistically, most people never bother with this type of stuff, and that's why a lot of these start to look kind of rough as they age. Overall though, the exterior holds up fairly well after over a decade, and the paint doesn't have any major defects. It's just mostly normal wear and tear, which does include the darker colors fading sooner. That's normal. But if this is how the outside ages, what does the inside look like after the same kind of use? Let's take a step inside.
In the interior, and you just got to understand a couple things about the Chevy Cruze. Now, I'm familiar with this car. I've driven it when it was new, and I did like the interior, but now that I'm seeing what other stuff is out there, I can see where a lot of their money went. A lot of their money went towards the interior. Yes, there are some things that fail, like some of the switches and the surface material will start to peel off and stuff, but in general, it's pretty good. This is 12 years old, and you can clearly tell that this is not a car that was cared for meticulously. And look at the interior. The dashboard, the material that we have here, all of the stuff, it looks really good. The material on the upper dashboard, it's almost like this Rubbermaid material. It does feel like a nice material to actually touch. Then you have hard plastic here, and then you have kind of like the leather material or vinyl, because you can't use leather in the sun like this. And the materials look phenomenal. The steering wheel is your standard foam steering wheel, but it still looks really good. It has the typical wear on the top that you would expect, but the steering wheel is in good condition. You have automatic headlights, you have visors that actually extend out, which is something that I actually appreciate. The door panels also have the same material as the dashboard up front, and it also has the same soft leather style inserts, and then a soft padded area to rest your arm, which is nice. All the windows are auto touch down. The door locks are right here though. I don't know why they do that. This is something that GM has always seemed to do, and Ford does it too with the Focus. I put it on the door. This doesn't have a full infotainment system. There are upgrades that you could do. Again, check the description if you want. If you want to support the channel, I will have some stuff available in the description. It's simple and it works. The leg room is very good on the Cruze, but it's good for one reason, and you'll see exactly why. Let me also note before I get in the back seat that this seat is not scooted all the way back. Oh my. Wow, this is the worst so far. If you compare it to something that is also in this class like a Corolla, the Corolla has way more leg room. And this seat, again, is not scooted all the way back. Let's see what happens when I scoot it all the way back. Oh my goodness. Yeah, you see this? I almost don't even fit in this car. Of course, I don't sit in this position, but you see what I'm talking about. I do try to scoot the seat all the way back to give you guys a real understanding of what to expect from this. And yeah, this has no space. Outside of the almost complete lack of leg room, the center armrest is pretty nice actually. It's kind of hard to get this thing down because we have these seat covers, but it's very wide. It's enough room for both rear passengers to fit their arm on, which is nice. The materials on the back door panels are not the same as the front. All just hard plastic, and even where you rest your arm, so there was some cost cutting done back here. It was a lot of the material was used up front and for the sound deadening because the interior is actually really quiet on the highway, which I talk about during the test drive. These interiors are probably the quietest interiors out there, so some sacrifices here. Also, 60/40 rear split folding seats, which is thumbs up, and it has a spare tire, another thumbs up. This was about the time when manufacturers stopped including spare tires, so I'll give it a thumbs up on that one.
If you're looking at a first generation Chevy Cruze, you've probably heard all of the horror stories. But here is what most people miss. They're probably looking at the wrong engine. The first generation Chevy Cruze ran from 2011 to 2015 here in the States, but the story actually starts 3 years prior in 2008 when this car was already on the road in South Korea as the Daewoo Lacetti. GM had already built out this global platform with the 1.8 liter gas engine and a 2.0 liter diesel engine long before it ever had the Chevy badge or the infamous 1.4 turbo engine. When it was finally introduced in the United States in 2011, GM also brought along the 1.4 liter turbo engine, and today that's the engine that steals all of the attention with this car, and usually for the wrong reasons. But what most people overlook is this one. In this video, the base model, which is the Cruze LS, or if you have a 2015 model year, it's either the LS or the L model. Under the hood is GM's naturally aspirated 1.8 liter LUW or LWE engine. Same engine, but LWE was partial zero emissions vehicle or PZEV. It's a timing belt driven 16 valve inline 4 cylinder with a cast iron block and aluminum head. It uses port fuel injection and has a compression ratio of 10.5 to 1, which is a bit high for port fuel injection, but it doesn't seem to affect the engine long term now that we're here over 15 years later. The engine puts out 138 horsepower at 6,300 RPM and 125 pound-feet of torque at 3,800 RPM. It's paired to the 60/30 6-speed automatic transmission or the M32 6-speed manual, and it gets roughly 24 miles per gallon city and around 35 highway depending on how it's driven. And no, this is not the engine you buy for performance, but in the real world of used budget cars, its biggest advantage is what it does not have.
What I like about the 1.8 motor from this is it doesn't suffer from a lot of the problems that the 1.4 has. The 1.4 has problems with turbocharger feed and return lines getting clogged. It has problems with turbocharger failure itself, and it also has problems with the coolant necks leaking. This doesn't have a turbocharger. It doesn't have the check valve problem. It has port fuel injection. It is actually a pretty simple drivetrain. There isn't a lot going on. You just need to watch it carefully when it comes to coolant leaks and oil leaks. If you could do that, you'll be all right.
And yes, you heard that right. While the 1.8 liter motor dodges the major nightmares of the 1.4 turbo, it still shares some of the same frustrating GM quirks. You're still dealing with the coolant leaks from poorly designed plastic parts, specifically the water necks, the thermostat housing, even the water pump can leak sooner than you would expect. You also have to watch out for the oil cooler leaking, which we'll cover more in the cons section. The good news is that all of this is manageable. The aftermarket has stepped up and there are now great solutions out there, including companies that manufacture upgraded metal fittings to permanently improve the longevity of these cooling system components. Then there's the timing belt. If you're not familiar with cars, a timing belt is a much larger job than a regular serpentine or alternator belt. I mention this because I often notice in the comments section that the two get mixed up and misunderstood. The timing belt on this vehicle needs to be replaced every 100,000 miles or 10 years or so, whichever comes first. A shop will typically charge $1,000 more or less, but the advantage of the 1.8 engine is that the belt is accessible and straightforward. You don't need a specialized dealership technician to do it, just make sure whoever works on it double and triple checks the timing marks. Even when we get to the cons of this engine, things stay pretty simple. Yes, the 6T30 automatic transmission has its own frustrations, especially in the earlier model years, but there is a major silver lining to those issues. To keep this short and simple, a major failure on this vehicle won't bankrupt you. Because GM built so many of these, used engine replacements typically run in the mid-range pricing from around $1,000 to $2,000 plus labor. And the transmission, typically just a few $100s plus labor of course. That's a very big difference compared to a lot of other vehicles out there where used transmissions alone can run $3,000 to $5,000 or even more. And I'm not talking about high-end luxury cars. I'm talking about cars like the 11th generation Toyota Camry. And that's a big part of the silver lining with the Chevy Cruze. Most owners who know these cars agree. The 1.8 liter engine is the winner when it comes to the long-term play. If you want fewer headaches and a simpler drivetrain, where your biggest job is just keeping an eye on coolant leaks, then this is the one to go with.
But for all of the positive remarks that I have giveth, I shall taketh some away, starting with
Coolant leaks.
these cars and coolant leaks seem to go hand in hand. The thermostat housings do tend to leak on these, and you want to pay very close attention to them. It is a well-known problem, and loss of coolant can lead to much more severe engine problems, as most people should know.
And that's the one area where this 1.8 motor doesn't really fare any better than the infamous 1.4 turbo. The components, in particular the water outlet, which is connected to the thermostat housing, is plastic and loves to spring leaks right where the plastic mates up to the metal housing. Other items that commonly leak are the water pump or the plastic coolant reservoir tank, and various heater hoses that can fail. I don't know exactly why GM struggles so much with these type of issues with this vehicle. Obviously, plastic doesn't do well in pressurized hot cooling systems, and every BMW owner is intimately familiar with this, considering those cars have been packed with plastic coolant parts and notoriously known for cooling system leaks for decades. The Cruze is no exception. But it's not just the plastic, it's the gaskets too. I don't know if it was an engineering choice of material or an actual quality control issue with the parts themselves, or maybe just a flawed design in how the gaskets seat, or maybe a combination of all three. Either way, my rule of thumb for this engine is simple. Whenever you're in there doing any sort of work and you see a coolant seal or gasket, just change it. The good news is that there's permanent solutions out there now. There's aftermarket companies out there that manufacture upgraded metal outlets to fix this design flaw for the long term. Another well-known problem area, and one that this exact car in this video actually had, is the oil cooler leak. It sits right behind the exhaust manifold, and when the seals go, it'll leak oil down the block. When I was filming this one, I can actually see smoke and smell it burning. I initially thought the car had broken down and maybe blown a coolant hose or something, but turns out it was just oil leaking from the cooler and burning right off on the hot manifold. The bigger concern though is not oil leaking outside the oil cooler, it's actually with the oil cooler itself, which can allow oil and coolant to mix if that fails. That's something you absolutely want to check if you're buying one of these. Is it the worst repair? No, the job itself isn't too bad. It's doable, but the big frustration is usually exhaust manifold bolts, especially if they're rusty, which is where a doable job can get frustrating pretty quickly. Again, the simplicity of this engine works in your favor. This is all serviceable stuff and definitely DIY friendly. If you address these weak points properly, especially with upgraded parts, you can definitely get solid long-term reliability out of this setup. One more place that oil and coolant can mix is the lower timing cover gasket. A lot of people may not be aware of this because it doesn't get discussed often, but I notice a lot of Cruze owners discussing things like oil and coolant mixing, and they get scared thinking it's a bad head gasket, but the lower timing cover right here separates oil and coolant, and if these seals fail, which it does with some owners, you will notice milky coolant, which is a telltale sign of a bad head gasket, but that's not the case here. This is a gasket that costs about $20 more or less, and it should be replaced when you change your timing belt. Now I want to say that's pretty much it for the major stuff on this engine. For the most part, that's it. There's a few other things that are known that you should be aware of, but these are mainly secondary. There's the VVT solenoids, which can cause sluggish acceleration, rough idle, and check engine lights with codes like P0011, P0014, or P0016. Most of the time this comes down to dirty oil, clogged screens, or a failing solenoid, and not the cam phasers, which is the conclusion that some people may jump to, but on this engine, while the phasers are not infallible, they're not really a common failure point. The VVT solenoids sit right on top of the engine near the timing belt and are actually pretty easy to get to. You also see things like evap purge valve failures, not the end of the world again, just one of those age-related things that may come up with this vehicle as you own it. Same thing with the ignition coils, which I honestly hate mentioning because almost every brand has had some ignition coil problems at some point, but it does also happen here. This uses a single coil pack, so when it goes, you replace the whole unit as one piece, and it's a simple, low cost, and actually DIY friendly repair. There are a couple of electrical quirks worth mentioning though, the negative battery cable on these cars had a known issue with poor crimps, which General Motors Technical Service Bulletin 14311B discusses. So if the car starts acting weird, flickering lights, random warnings, or even loss of power steering, check your grounds before you start throwing parts at it. Speaking of the power steering system, which is an electric power steering system, there was a special coverage bulletin for power steering stick slip conditions, which is bulletin number 14232. Owners report that the steering wheel feels like it sticks or gets notchy in the center position, especially at highway speeds, forcing constant small corrections to keep the car straight. GM acknowledged this problem and extended the warranty on the electric power steering system to 10 years or 150,000 miles for the 2011 to 2012 models. The fix was replacing the steering gear assembly. For the 2013 and 2014 models, GM attempted to address this with a software reprogram, although some owners still reported issues requiring the rack replacement. Again, this is a known problem, not a rampant one if that makes sense. Then there's the brake pedal position sensor. If that fails, you'll get a check engine light with a P057C code, and the telltale sign of a bad sensor is simple: your brake lights stay on. And there is a relearn procedure, but again, it's just known and not a major issue. Beyond that, the rest of the stuff is more typical wear items. Things like the PCV valve, which is built into the valve cover, but it's nowhere near as serious of a problem as the issues on the 1.4 engine, and things like engine and transmission mounts wearing out over time. Yes, this may sound like a bit of a list, but I don't want to make this car seem like it's constantly breaking down. Those are just things that owners have experienced throughout the years. Most of them are manageable, and once you handle them, you move on and the car is fine.
As far as the 6T30 goes, it's the 6-speed automatic transmission, and it had some known failures. It can last a long time, but there are a few things that you need to know about the 6T30 transmission.
When it comes to this transmission, you'll find people online poking fun at it because honestly, it did get off to a rough start. The early 2011 to 2012 Chevy Cruze models had more of the transmission failures. Those are what rebuilders refer to as the Gen 1 design. The big issue in those early years was the 3.5 reverse failure. It basically came down to the wave plate material. It would fatigue, crack, and break, and when that happened, you'd instantly lose third gear, fifth gear, and reverse. And then the remaining metal debris would get pushed through the rest of the transmission, destroying everything. This was a well-known issue across General Motors, where the famous GM Special Coverage Bulletin 14404 comes from. However, that bulletin applied to the larger vehicles like the Equinox, Acadia, and Traverse, not this Cruze, even though the Cruze had its own version of the 3.5 reverse problem. But the problem in the Cruze was not nearly as widespread as it was with the larger vehicles, and that brings us to the silver lining, which matters more today than it did over 10 years ago. By 2013, GM moved to what rebuilders referred to as the Gen 2 design, which addressed a lot of these issues. And that lines up with what you see in the real world. The early cars had a lot of the complaints, while the later ones don't really dominate the owner forums in the same way. Because of that, the worst of the early transmissions have already failed and have been rebuilt with updated parts. Some may have survived through gentle driving, but most of the ones still on the road today will be okay. And here's the part I, strangely enough, like about this problem. It's not a mysterious failure where nobody knows what happened or what got fixed. Transmission builders know these units well. They understand the 3.5 reverse failure, and they're familiar with the other issues that can come from a lack of fluid changes like pressure control problems or valve body wear. These problems are documented, understood, and fixable. Another advantage is availability. There are a lot of these transmissions out there, and they're relatively inexpensive. You can find used units for a few $100 plus labor, of course, which compared to something like a Nissan CVT or even the Toyota 8-speed transmission on the used market, you're often looking at several $1,000s just for the used transmission. And suddenly the Cruze starts looking a whole lot less scary. So what does this all mean? Yes, the 6T30 was a weak point, but in my opinion, a lot of that has already been addressed by now. What owners still seem to deal with more than the transmission is the cooling system leaks. So I'll leave it like this. Most of these cars today will be okay if they shift well, they have clean fluid, and haven't been abused. I'd still service it, and I would not beat on it, especially knowing the history behind the wave plate failures in the earlier units. But if you're on a test drive and you feel anything weird, slipping, or delayed engagement, don't talk yourself into the car, just walk away or make sure the price is cheap enough to justify putting up with it. As far as the manual transmission goes, which is the M32, paired with both the 1.4 and 1.8 motors, just with different final drive ratios, is these transmissions are generally reliable as you would expect from a manual, but there are still a couple of known issues. The main one is the 6-gear bearing failure. A lot of owners believe this comes from the transmission transmission being underfilled from the factory. GM calls for about 1.8 quarts, but many owners recommend filling it closer to 2.4 quarts to help prevent the 6-gear bearing from being starved of oil. Another issue is the dual mass flywheel. When that starts to fail, you may hear a clunk or a thump when you're accelerating. It's not the cheapest repair, mainly because the cost of the flywheel is a little high, and of course the transmission has to be removed to get to the flywheel. Outside of those couple of things, these manual transmissions do last. You just want to be aware of those issues and keep an ear out for any unusual noises. The rest of the problems with the Cruze are honestly just your typical aging car annoyances. When it comes to the suspension, if you hear a front end clunk, it's almost always the sway bar end links. It's a very easy fix, but it's also a super common complaint. You may also run into HVAC blend door motor issues for the AC and heat controls, or a trunk lock actuator that decides to quit and needs replacing. Again, annoying but not headline news. There's also a known water leak issue which GM actually issued a service bulletin for regarding a seal near the rear window that lets rain drip into the trunk. But honestly, trunk leaks happen on a lot of other brands as well. It's not unique to the Cruze. As for the interior, it actually wears pretty well. I'd call it cheap car durable. You may get rattles, the plastic chrome trim can peel, and yes, owners do complain about slicing their fingers on the sharp peeling edges of that chrome trim, so be careful if you see it wearing. You may also see the paint chipping off the buttons over time, but the more important thing is that there's no major structural interior failures here. The dashboards don't crack and disintegrate, nor does the dash or the door panels melt into goo like we see on some other brands. It's very livable for the long term. And look, I know we're deep into this video. Just like every other review, I know the list of problems probably sounds massive as I start going through everything, but the reality is the 1.8 liter Cruze is actually a very good car. Most owners can easily drive these well past 200,000 miles with just minor repairs and checking for coolant leaks. Most Cruze owners are now fully aware that the 1.8 liter is far less dramatic than the 1.4. But okay, enough talking about what goes wrong with this. Let's get this on the road and see how it actually drives.
Test driving the Chevy Cruze. We have a 2014 model year. The seat took a little while to adjust. It doesn't have all the adjustments that I would like, but it works. You know, I rented one of these when they were new over 10 years ago now. This was back in 2012, and I had the 1.4 turbo. I remember that the ride quality was better than I expected, especially the sound deadening. Well, compared to my 97 Honda, everything is quieter. We do have some thunks from the front end. It does ride pretty good overall though, especially considering we're 12 years now. This is the 1.8 liter, however. This is not the 1.4. I'm always familiar with the 1.4 Ecotech because of all the problems that it had, and it gave this car a bad reputation. Even though it's a motor that you can maintain, I don't want to get too carried away. We'll save that one for a separate review, but the Chevy Cruze 1.4 review will be coming to this channel. I like the 1.8 already. We haven't even gotten on the highway yet. We are fully warmed up. You know, the Cruze gets a bad reputation. It's actually a neat little car. The throttle has that little delay to kind of smoothen things out. I don't know how much I care for it, but I don't hate it though. We have a wide open entrance here. I expected more from the 1.8. It's not bad to get up to highway speed, but it really just, it doesn't have the grunt that I expected it to have. The 1.4 has more of the power because it's a turbocharged motor. Around town, the 1.8 isn't bad. On the highway, okay, maybe I retract some of that statement. It's okay. It's not awful, but I think I expected more from this engine. The car, however, feels great on the highway. For a car in this class, it feels excellent, actually. I would actually consider the ride to be better than the Honda, the Corolla, and the road noise is much, much lower. It's quieter, the engine is quieter, the road noise is lower. I will say, however, the Corolla did have a bad engine mount, so I can't knock the Corolla too hard on that one. That was a 2016 model year Corolla. This is a 2014 Chevy Cruze. The 1.8, you don't have to put your foot to the floor to get some highway acceleration out of it. But if you put your foot to the floor, it doesn't give you as much as you would expect. Does that make any sense? If you give it a little bit of throttle, it does give you a decent amount of highway acceleration. And it does kick down a little bit. It doesn't kick down to the lowest possible gear, but it does give you a little bit of power. Put my foot down maybe halfway. And you also don't have to put your foot all the way down to the floor for it to really kick down to the lowest passing gear. I don't know what GM does with their interiors, but that smell that they had when they were new still lingers. The interior plastics and whatever they make it out of, whatever their supplier is, whatever they use, it still smells very close to what it did when it was new. I gotta say, I know everybody, non-Cruze owners, are gonna want to criticize the Cruze, especially mechanics that work on them, because they see all these problems that happen with them. And yes, I understand that there's a lot of frustrations, especially with them. This one in particular, the coolant leaks, they all have that problem, no matter whether it's the 1.4 or the 1.8. But the ride is why they sold. These cars ride really well for the class that they're in. For small cars, they ride very well. You gotta keep in mind that these cars are as budget as they come today. I mean, you can find these things for, you know, $3,000. And so you got to really think about what you're willing to deal with. The 1.8 is better because you don't have to deal with all of the turbocharger woes that come with the 1.4. I really like this highway ride. I got to give it to GM on this one. This one is far superior to Honda. It's close to Toyota. I would say it's matched Toyota, if not a little bit better. The ride, not the reliability of the car, but the ride. I want you to think about this for a second, because I know what the internet wants to do. They want me to start making fun of cars, but you got to give credit where credit is due. And this one has a really, really superior ride on the highway, in the city. It's very, very quiet, has a lot of sound deadening for an economy car. That's excellent. This car had a little clunk when I first took it out. It probably needs struts or maybe a lower control arm bushing or whatever it may be, but that clunk went away. Once we're on the highway, this thing rides incredible. I know that these cars are not as reliable in general as some of the Toyotas and the Hondas, but they're not awful. They're not as bad as people make them out to be online. Well, depending on which engine you pick. If you wonder why people buy these cars today, one, because they're cheap, but two, they ride really well. They ride extremely well. They're comfortable, they're quiet. If you could find the 1.8, that would be the one I would pick, and I would maintain it well. I would change the transmission fluid, I would deal with the cooling system right off the bat, and run the car for as long as you want to keep it, and enjoy a good ride. There's sound deadening, and then there's ride refinement, where it soaks up the bumps better. This soaks up the bumps very well. I would call this refined. And it's quiet. It does have a lot of sound deadening. So there's the trade-off. It's not a Toyota, but it rides incredibly well. In fact, just as good, if not better. And they're cheap. Would I buy one of these cars? It depends on my situation. I think if I were looking for a car in a very low budget, people complain about these $10,000 cars all the time, and this exists. You got to understand that this needs to be maintained. You can't just forget about the maintenance, but it's a doable car, and it's a good car. It's a comfortable car. It's a nice car, and to me, it would be worth it, yeah.
The first generation Chevy Cruze gets a pretty bad rap in general, but looking back at this car 15 years later, it's honestly not as bad as people make it out to be. A lot of the major nightmares like those early transmission failures happened on the first few model years, and the good news is those problems were actually addressed. But the most special part about the first generation Cruze is something that we haven't really focused on yet in this video, and that's the price. These cars can be found for next to nothing on the used car market. It's a genuinely cheap vehicle that can last a very long time as long as you know how to handle its mechanical quirks. It has low road noise and it does everything else you'd need an economy car to do just fine. If you've been discouraged by crazy used car prices lately, the Chevy Cruze 1.8 liter non-turbo is proof that good affordable cars do still exist out there. And now that you've seen this video, you have a solid idea of exactly what to look out for rather than just strolling onto a used car lot and buying blindly. So if you're out there looking for a genuinely cheap, reliable used car that can give you years of good service, well, you found it. Did I mention I like the price? And so that makes the first generation Chevy Cruze 1.8 liter. Remember, it's always the context and not the score that matters. The 6 score that I give is not a D. I reserve 6 for good engines with advisories, things that are major failures or things that can destroy the engine. In this case, this engine gets a 6.9. This is an excellent engine, actually. It's a shame that they didn't do a good job with the cooling system. But this one is simple. It's the coolant reservoir, the thermostat housing and water outlet, which connect together, the oil cooler, and the timing cover gasket, which is behind the timing
belt. I actually recommend doing that when you're doing the timing belt. Tell your mechanic if you didn't mention it to them, but you should do that. That's kind of a not as common problem, but it's starting to show up. These cars are now 10, 15 years old now. Those buying these cars today and driving them for several years, you need to know about that because that's something you may end up dealing with. But these parts are not expensive. Most of them are pretty accessible besides the oil cooler behind the manifold and the timing cover seal, which is behind the timing belt. But it's manageable if you know about it. You know, a lot of people get rid of these engines because they see oil and coolant mixing and they get scared and think it's a head gasket. And I know somebody's buying these cars and they know this and they're fixing them for maybe $100 and making thousands of dollars of profit off of them. But now you've watched this video and you know too, there is no other major issues. There's things like the VVT actuators. Yeah, that's annoying, not unique to Chevy. Occasional owners run into the actual phasers or the VVT gears, which you can replace if you want to while you're doing your timing belt. But that's not really a common problem. A handful of people deal with them. After 10, 15 years, you'll see some stuff like that. But the engine itself, it's good. It lasts for as long as you take care of it. There isn't any major flaw that causes the engines to fail all on its own. Almost everything is related to overheating. And so I see owners topping these things off knowing that they're leaking coolant. Stop if that's you and get it fixed. This is not the car to do that with. Otherwise, it's an excellent engine with the advisory of the cooling system. 6.9 is what it gets. The transmission was also a difficult one. I don't see owners complaining about the transmission as much as they did when they were newer. And it kind of seems to reinforce the fact that a lot of these failed early on, especially 2011 to 2012 models for the Gen 1 transmission, and they were replaced with the upgraded wave plate, and most of them have been fine since. Still, you should change your transmission fluid and maintain your transmission as any other vehicle, but they don't really steal the show on the Cruze forums anymore. So yes, early 6T30 problems were pretty big, but today, a lot of that has actually been addressed, but something to keep on your radar still. It was a real known problem, so earlier cars, you want to look to see if that was addressed and how they were taken care of. And then the later Gen 2 cars, you should be okay as long as the owner actually cared for the transmission. So 6.5, it's actually not a bad transmission, just the advisory with all the early failures that were corrected. Suspension is pretty simple, 7.5. I see a lot of complaints about clunks from the sway bar end links, lower control arm bushings, a little bit more than I do on other brands, but honestly these are some of the easiest parts to change, besides having to deal with rust. But wear and tear should be expected at this point. Lower control arm bushing should be expected 5 years ago actually. All part of a car that's 10, 15 years old. 7.5. DIY and cost to repair. I wish the engine was cheaper for this car. It's in the $1,200 to $2,400 range. To me, that's high, but in reality, it's kind of average, mid-range. The Corolla engine pricing is somewhat similar as well. I do suspect these might be a little high because of some failures related to lack of maintenance, especially the cooling system. But the prices are reasonable enough to where it doesn't leave you stuck. Transmissions are dirt cheap. Should you run into a problem, use transmissions Gen 1, Gen 2, both $300, $500, $600 maybe. And rebuilt transmissions are under $3,000 like after shipping. That is excellent actually, and it leaves owners even more options should you say, I want to keep this car for a very long time. I want something that's actually rebuilt, good for a long time, and I'm willing to spend the money on it. And I know some people don't want to spend the money on a Chevy Cruze because the car isn't worth that much money, but in some cases it actually may still be worth it. Intrinsic value is what you should be looking at with the car and not how much is the car worth, how much I want to spend it, because you can buy a 2019 Toyota Camry for $20,000 and that transmission can fail, and guess what? That one costs about $5 to $8 to replace. And you know how much the car is worth after you replace it? Not any more than what you paid for it. It's no difference. That's the way I see. We'll have another discussion about that for another day, but the options for the Cruze are actually really good. I like these options. The entire cooling system is relatively simple. The thermostat is easy as pie. The reservoir is also easy as pie. The oil cooler is easy unless you have to deal with rust, but if you're looking at here, like you see on the screen here, this is the manifold. It's the catalytic converters built in, and you see on the bottom the studs screw in. They can break right there. If you're working on your own car, just drill through and get a stud and a nut. That works the best. The worst case scenario would be if the manifold bolts up top break. They're less likely to be as rusted as the ones on the bottom because those are exposed to all the road salt. But that's the worst thing. There's only a few bolts that come off. The manifold comes off, you move the stuff out of the way. It's doable for the DIYer. And then the oil cooler is fully exposed. You can do what you need to do, get that all replaced. The timing belt, some people may not like, and I get that. It's going to cost you some money to do it. Some Some shops are going to charge around $1,000, some are going to charge more, and some of the cheaper ones will charge less. You don't need a specialty shop to get this done. You can also DIY this as well. Just double, triple check your timing marks. And don't forget about the timing cover gasket behind the timing belt. A lot of people are probably going to be dealing with those things failing at this point, 10 to 15 years. But it's all stuff that you can DIY. Timing belt every 100,000, I think it's 97,400 miles. I don't remember exactly what the manual said, but it's around 97,000 miles that it recommends to get done. Parts for this car are cheap, it's easy to fix, everything is DIYable. I'm giving it a 7.5. The interior is also getting a 7.5. It has some of the typical GM wear annoyances, the buttons peeling, some of the trim peeling, not as nice, but there's nothing major, melting, cracked dashboards, disintegrating panels, none of that. It's good. I like it. It works for me. I'm giving it a 7.5. Exterior probably might piss people off because, again, any good score for the Cruze I think people are not going to like, but I'm going to give it an 8. The paint had no major defects. By now, you'll just see regular wear and tear. Darker paints are going to fade, period. That's just, it's gonna happen. Other GM vehicles had a whole bunch of peeling problems with the paint, white paint in particular, some of the blue paints. Toyota had problems with the white paint, Honda had problems with the white paint, Kia had problems with the white paint, everybody had problems with it. Nobody could get it down, but this one does not. I don't know why. GM just maybe got lucky. I'm not saying GM is the best out there. There's a lot of other vehicle paints that have gone wrong, but this one didn't. This one went well. The rest of the trim is pretty decent. The roof rubber doesn't look very nice after a while. It does look ugly, but that's not hard to replace. Pretty similar to the Honda Pilot that I just did. It disintegrates. The rest of the stuff is very manageable. I'm impressed. I'm giving it an 8. And that brings the total score to 7.23. This is actually a good car. Your number one goal is cooling system. Cooling system and cooling system. That's it. If you stay on top of that, this engine will go for as long as you take care of it. Hey, thanks for checking this video out. It's been a while since I've posted a video. There's a lot going on. I'll probably share a year later from now with the business. But I have not stopped filming. I have a lot of vehicles that are still coming up and I'm going to start working on them again. So make sure to subscribe to the channel because there's a lot more coming. I appreciate all the likes, comments, corrections as well. I appreciate all of it. And hey, I will see you in the next video.